Hello, greetings and durud. Welcome to the latest edition of Farhang Foundation's Farhang Connect live virtual talk series. I am Alireza Ardekani, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation. We are a non-political, non-religious, not-for-profit organization that thrives with the support of its members. Our sole mission is to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture, enriching the global community. Farhang Foundation achieves its mission through collaborations with esteemed museums, universities, schools, and performing arts organizations to support and promote programs, performances, and academic initiatives, all in support of Iranian art, culture, history, and academics. Today, we are honored to present this episode in collaboration with the renowned Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, as we welcome the prolific artist Afruz Amighi for To Those Whom No One Owns, a discussion about Miss Amighi's incredible body of work, including her upcoming monumental commission for the Asian Art Museum. Now, please join me in welcoming Ms. Naz Cuguoglu, the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Asian Art Museum.
Hi, Alireza. Thank you so much for this, great introduction. And also, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone from Farhang Foundation. We are so excited to be here today. So I just want to provide a little bit, the structure of our talk today. I'll start by presenting Afruz, a little short introduction to her biography, and then we will start our conversation, and there's going to be a Q&A. Just to introduce Afruz, Afruz Amighi completed her BA in political science at Columbia University and her M.F.A. at New York University. Amighi's large-scale installations based on the interplay between light and shadow have been exhibited throughout the United States, Europe, and Middle East. She is the inaugural recipient of the Jamil Prize for Middle Eastern Contemporary Art. In 2011, Amighi was the recipient of a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Sculpture. And in 2013, her work was commissioned for the 55th Venice Biennial. Her installations have been exhibited in sculptural parks and museums throughout the United States. And in 2023, Amighi had her debut at Asia Society Museum, New York. Amighi's upcoming projects involve experimentation in poetry, stained glass, and somatic ritual with light and shadow as her material touchstone. And Afruz currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. So I welcome Afruz to the stage with me today to start our conversation. Just to, kick it off. Hi, Afruz. It's so great to have you here. Like today we will be talking about your upcoming project at the Asian Art Museum, which we are so excited about. And I was thinking, we can start talking about your previous projects and how those projects lead to this like very important moment in your career and in your practice. One thing that's maybe important to note is that, at Asian Art Museum, we are at this moment of also like diversifying Asia. So just saying that, West Asia is also Asia. And I feel like this project is coming to life in this very important moment. And I'm so excited to talk about that today with you. And I know that your art incorporates chain. So I thought that maybe we can start talking about the materials that you use. Like chain, we were talking, it has like so many symbolisms like bondage, hair, embroidery. And maybe you can talk about how this symbolism like relates to themes that you are interested in, such as mortality, spirits, just thinking about your past works.
Yes, maybe it would be a time for me to share some images. Okay. So yes, I think that as much as light and shadow have been a very dominant material in most of my work for the past few decades, chain is certainly has been there from the beginning as well. And I think on a material level, the attraction was the way that it interacts with light. You know, opposed to, say, like a large solid piece of metal that creates a strong reflection, a strong glare. There's something about the movement inherent to chain, the negative space that creates the glimmer, I think, that we all are seduced by in the material. And I think that also chain, whether it's the most fine jewelry chain or the most heavy industrial type of chain, there's something, at least for me, about it that is evocative of the human form, that I can't really look at it without thinking about the body, the human body, and the way that it drapes on the human body, and how that can exist on a spectrum from adornment to enslavement. And that's always been a sort of interesting tension point for me with the material. In this image that you are all seeing, this is a piece that I made during the pandemic. It's called Spirit Canopy. It was on view last year at the Asia Society in New York. And this was a piece that I made out of black costume jewelry chain. And it was made during a very specific moment in the pandemic, in which, I mean, everybody experienced that time differently, but this was a moment in New York City where there was emptiness. There were no cars on the streets. There was nobody outside. And yet, when I was walking back and forth to my studio, I felt this crowdedness of non-human forms, of somehow ghosts, somehow some other kind of forms in the air. And so I would walk to the studio in this crowded sort of emptiness and try to give shape to these forms that were sort of hovering around in the air. And that sort of was the push behind the project, was to somehow give to actualize these spirits that were lingering, that were forming this kind of dense canopy above the city. And in some ways, I at the time, I thought of it as sort of creating a place for the spirits to go. But I think while I was making it, it was very clear that those of us who are living, the things we do are not so much for those who have passed, but they're for ourselves to sort of, you know, reckon with that loss. And so this work was very much about providing some kind of map or some kind of roadmap for how to navigate that particular time, which was very, very heavy.
I love what you say about also, you know, making a space for spirits to go and just thinking about where are the spirits gonna go, you know? I feel like it's so special. I think we are looking at the video now on our screens. So
yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, leading to also my house, my tomb, maybe from there, right? Like just thinking about also because that piece is also about spirits, and I feel like making a space for spirits. I feel like you are really interested in these like contradictory almost things. Like that piece is about the concept of fullness with absence, for example. And I love like how one work leads to other work in your practice. And that piece was shown at Asian Art Museum before. So I was thinking maybe you could also share some inspiration behind that piece and its connection to the Taj Mahal, you know, and how it also touches upon these concepts.
Okay. So I will just find my way to that project. What you're seeing that I'm sort of skipping through is just past projects where I've used chain as the main medium. And I think I just want to say one thing before we move to the My House, My Tomb, is that one thing that I find really interesting about the material is that in some of these images, you can see how solid it appears. It almost appears like it's creating a dense skin that can't be easily penetrated. And then in other instances, the way the light interacts with the material, it creates a feeling that it's not a non-object, that it's not even really there. And I think that, again, that sort of like idea that Naz was mentioning about presence and absence, about weight and weightlessness, that's something that I think the chain helps me, express some of those those feelings. And here we are now at the project that Naz just mentioned, which pictured here it's installed at the Loggia in the Asian Art Museum. This piece is called My House, My Tomb. It's hard to see in this image, but there are actually chains holding up these structures in this sort of travertine niche. This was a piece that I had made very much based around one of the many, many myths that have grown up over the centuries around the Taj Mahal in Agra. The Taj Mahal has produced so many mythologies around it, as one can imagine. And the one that I read some years ago that I really took me was this myth that the king Shah Jahan, who had built it, the original white marble Taj for his wife as a tomb for her, that he was planning, according to myth, to build a second Taj Mahal directly across the river from the original Taj, but that he was going to build it in black marble, and that it would sort of just be this resting place for him across from his beloved. It's identical, but in black marble. And I remember reading about that. And I remember reading about the fact that it's a very widespread myth that many people have read about. And I started to imagine all these people who know of that myth. And I started to imagine how they were imagining in their minds what that would look like. What was the visual that conjured for people? What was it? And so I was just so fascinated by the fact that there's this imaginary architecture, this imaginary echo of the Taj, this imaginary twin that lives in the minds of millions and millions of people. And so, as daunting as it was to sort of do a project about the Taj Mahal, which is such an epic thing, I decided that I wanted to sort of play with that idea of creating its twin. And that's sort of what, that's what you're looking at in this situation, is that the bottom structure, which is made out of welded steel and silver chain, represents the original Taj. And then the black mesh structure above it sort of represents the most it's rising out of the original Taj Mahal, but the unrealized twin. So that was kind of the inspiration behind the piece. And I think in this picture, you can sort of see how bare bones the project is, and that a lot of my work is very sparse. And it's really the light and the shadow that in my mind are the materials and forms that give it sort of life and give it its flesh, I guess. This is just a video of the same piece.
I mean, I was lucky to experience this piece at the Asian Art Museum, and it was such in great conversation with the architecture. And it was really otherworldly. I mean, you can see it in the video. Our audience can also see it. As you enter, it almost feels like you enter into this other universe. It's so poetic, right? With the light and with all these structures. So, and I know that, this use of steel, mesh, and light, it's also a common practice that you have. And I feel like this project also relates to, for example, another project that's titled Nameless. And this again, otherworldly realm that comes back to the conversation. It almost feels like, Afruz, you are kind of bending time with these projects, it's really like when you like encounter the art, like it feels like you feel, you lose space, almost like perception of space, and it's another world. So I wonder if you can also elaborate on the conceptual background on the specific piece Nameless and other related past work, how you create this otherworldly experiences, but also giving a little bit personal narratives, because I really appreciate that you usually also have like a personal touch. And there's always a story behind all of these pieces. And for Nameless, there is an extra, I think, special story. And I would love you to share it with our audience today.
Yes, so Naz, that's right. There's this project Nameless, it started with one story and it sort of ended with a different story. And at its inception, I was very much, as with the previous piece that was sort of inspired by the Taj Mahal, with this piece, I was very much at the time looking at the mosques in southern Spain, the mosques that are now churches, that were once mosques and before them churches, and so on and so forth, that sort of have this hybridity nestled into their forms. And I was really fixated on this melding of forms through religion and culture, because it sort of dawned on me as I was looking at all these structures that I think that humans in our minds, we have these like definitions and categories and labels that are very rigid, and that they're often more rigid than the reality around us, which is so mixed and hybrid and non-sectarian. And so I feel like there's almost like a dissonance between our minds and like what is actually taking place. And so part of the idea for this piece was to create a structure that a shrine type of structure, but that a structure that couldn't quite be called a church or a temple or a mosque, but that had a sense of all or many of these influences. And so that's part of what the title is called, Nameless. But there's another reason, which is as I was welding and building the structure, it's the skeleton is made out of steel. Before I put what you're looking at, which is like a fiberglass mesh, black mesh on the piece, it was just a steel structure, and I was waiting for the bus to go home from the studio, and it was a horrible day. I right in front of me, there was a hit and run. A young cyclist was hit by a car, and he died right in front of me. And it was very traumatic, and I was scared. I was scared by it, deeply sad for this young man and for the experience of being so close to someone being there and then not being there, that moment. And so I couldn't leave the house for a few weeks. I was so upset. But when I finally made it back to the studio, the project there was a funerary aspect to it. And so that was when I decided to sew onto the structure this black mesh. This was the first piece where I had used black mesh. I know you saw My House, My Tomb, but this was the first time I had used it. It had been sitting in rolls in my studio for 6 years, and I finally found a way to use it, and I sewed it onto the structure with thread that looks like hair. So there was a whole ritualistic aspect to it that I guess it was partially a way of me trying to pay some kind of homage to this life that had expired in front of me.
Do you also want to go through the other past projects and how they relate to them? Maybe like quickly as we lead to your performance as well. These images.
Okay. do you want me to go back, like backward to,
Or we can just lead to the performance from here, maybe. Because I feel like the way, you started speaking about the hair and, this kind of like one moment there, one moment not there, like everything happening so quickly. I feel like there's something about it that relates to your performance practice as well. And because then you made like recently the Within the Metamorphosis performance. And when we were talking about it, we were speaking like how it relates to the themes of change and like how it relates to reflecting on social change, but also how social change is so much about like sometimes sacrifices, right? For something to happen, like somebody needs to sacrifice to a certain extent. So I was curious, how I guess like this practice of making objects like relates to your performance practice in a way and your body. And I love that you started talking about hair, and I'm curious to hear how it might bring us to this practice and how, we were also talking about reflecting on the change that unfolds on the streets and women revolution. So I'm just so curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I'm going to, as you suggest, just go a little bit over some of the past pieces, and
Okay,
then I'll
sure.
try to end up where you ended up. So I just quickly going through some of these works. This is a piece that's called We Wear Chains, and I think it speaks to some of what Naz was starting to talk about. This was a first sort of real figural piece that I did. And it's a procession of women who are sort of dripping with these chains that are pouring down from this thunder cloud. I like I said, I was sort of working with this idea of chains having these multiple meanings. And in some cases, I think that even if you, in this piece, I was very much thinking about adornment itself as a form of oppression. That, we often think of things like adornment or jewelry as being somehow harmless, but if you really go into them, they themselves represent a lot of a certain type of different enslavement, to whether it's to status, to femininity in relation to being a piece of property. And so these were just themes that I was sort of playing with. This is some years ago. And as you can see in a lot of these works, there's the chain, there's the steel, there's the mesh, there's the light and the shadow. This is a piece called The Guardian. But it was finally in this piece that I made also during the pandemic that I found a way to wed the two materials literally together. This was a tapestry that I made over the course of 4 months in my studio, again, during the pandemic. It's black chain that I wove into black mesh. It is then hung and illuminated with light, creating a shadow behind it. And it was very much a sort of meditation on the fragmentation of things, the fragmentation of norms, patterns, habits, routines. So yeah, I wanted to just take a minute with that because it's sort of every once in a while when I play with materials, they'll sometimes for many years exist side by side in the same work. And then there will be moments where they actually become one. And that was one of those moments. Sort of moving on to some of the issues that Naz was raising about the movements that started the revolution that happened in Iran. This is a piece that I was making during that time in the past 2 years, called Locked, that was very much influential in the performance that Naz mentioned, which is called Within the Metamorphosis, which happened at Asia Society in New York last spring. this was right in the midst of, in the aftermath of the murder of Mahsa Amini. And it was very much a meditation on all that I was experiencing or reflecting on those events. Would you like me to just sort of go into what I was thinking about? It's tough. It's a performance. I'm showing you some stills from the performance. It involved a musical composition, vocals, dance, video, and the basis for the performance was a poem that I wrote. So, you know what? Let me tell you a little bit about what I was thinking about. The project is called Within the Metamorphosis, and that title was taken directly from this incredible article that I read that was an exchange between the Iranian journalist Shiva Khavanrad and the Italian novelist Elena Ferrante. And in this article, I think it was published in The Guardian, the two were discussing parallels between what was unfolding in Iran and what had happened in Elena's books and the development of her female characters, who very much were grappling with living in a highly misogynistic society. And there was one moment in the interview where Elena Ferrante says that one of her characters, I think her name is Lila, that she is not capable of living with partial freedoms, that she excruciatingly must live permanently within the metamorphosis. And there was something about that statement and something about that feeling that it evoked that made me feel that is what, you know, people are existing in and acting within for a prolonged period of time. And sort of it gave me a bit of a framework to sort of for me to grapple with what I was thinking, what was happening around me. And really there were a few themes that were really important to me. The first was that, you know, the murder of Jina was the murder of a woman in Iran who was of Kurdish descent. And it's really, to me, that the fact that galvanized people in this movement spoke to the bursting of this myth of nationalism and homogeneity in Iran that every nation, you know, mythologizes about, right? This sort of purity, this notions of nationalism. And the fact that this woman who sort of existed outside the lines, right? These artificial BS lines that, you know, are created for political, you know, reasons, that is what galvanized people, to me, was so incredibly powerful. And that is why I think part of why it was so threatening, because once you erase the lines, you know, the precariousness of those, that small group of people who are in power, becomes so obvious. And
yeah.
yeah.
I feel like we and all the audience can feel your, like, the passion behind it, you know, the passion behind this project. And I feel like this kind of, you know, metamorphosis, change, and the body, and how the body is an important part of this story, you know, because the protests are also about the body. Like, the revolution is so bodily, and the human figures, like, we can all see like how human figures slowly entered into your practice, and with the performance it got even more heightened. I feel like, you know, gain even more importance. And then your upcoming project, which I also want to make sure that we have time to talk about, you know, the upcoming project at Asian Art Museum that's titled To Those Whom No One Owns. I feel like this performance piece is a great project that leads to that as we are preparing for this project. And just for the audience, like to give them some context about this project, the importance of this project that we'll have at Asian Art Museum is that it's actually the first large-scale work by an Iranian American woman artist showcased at the Asian Art Museum. So I think that's what makes this so important. Like I feel like it's art historical. It's like I'm so excited we are doing this together. And then, you know, it's also showcases these human figures within the architecture of the museum that are in a transformative dance. And so I was thinking maybe you can share a few insights. You know, there are so many inspirations behind this piece, like from Felix Gonzalez Torres to Egyptian goddess, Neve, who is like, you know, known for cosmos, wisdom. So much to talk about. Maybe you can start telling us a little bit about that piece.
Sure. Yes. Sorry, I got a little caught up there, but you know, I do think that in this piece that we're working on together, that you're now looking at, like this is a Photoshop rendering, by the way, of the piece, but I think it's a very much a continuation of the ideas that went into the piece within the metamorphosis, the performance. It's really a deepening of an exploration of those similar ideas. The title, To Those Whom No One Owns, as Naz mentioned, comes or is inspired by a Felix Gonzalez Torres t-shirt that was made in the 90s. I saw someone wearing it in the subway, and it, you know, it's basically a blank t-shirt, and then on the back it says "Nobody owns me." And it struck me that the artist intentionally put that statement on the back, in the sense that in order to be free, you have to turn your back on society. There's no way around that. And so I thought that was really powerful. And I think it's true. And in this project, that was sort of the starting point for me of like thinking about that is a point in which we all go through, those of us who butt up against the lines, right? All the lines that are drawn. But that there eventually has to be a turning back, a full rotation. And so that's sort of where I wanted to create these sculptures that were in this, they were figural forms with gowns, and that they were in a state of rotation, permanent rotation, right? Permanent movement, permanent somatic ritual, permanent change, permanent transformation. And some of the sculptures you can see in this sort of another rendering, part of their hair, part of their chains are coming unraveled. And hopefully when I make these works and install them, we can have some of the chain coming very close to the viewers, like not super close, but close enough, because I think that was really important to me, was like the gesture of removing one's hair covering, one's hijab, is monumental in and of itself. But then the act of cutting the hair, many people talk about this as sort of act of mourning associated with mourning rituals. But when I saw it over and over again, all I could think of was that, and this is why I think that what happened in Iran spoke to so many women around the world, was this feeling of like, it's not enough to have my hair free. I have to get rid of my hair because it is the symbol of the way I'm objectified, whether I have to cover it or whether it's out in the open. It's a symbol. It's become, in the Abrahamic religions, a symbol of control and of objecthood. And to me, seeing women cutting it was almost like saying, I'm detaching from my objecthood, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess in this piece, I wanted to somehow bring an element of that unraveling or that de-gendering,
Yes.
right? And as a way to sort of look for dignity and right. So anyway, so when I was building a prototype for the project, that's what you're looking at now. Because this is something that's going to be suspended over museum goers' heads. I had to sort of figure out the weight and all the mechanics of it. So what you're looking at in these images is the bottom half, the bottom 13-foot half, the skirt. And, as you see in these renderings, there will be like another 10 feet of sort of like the torso, the frame, the figure. And the way that the museum is set up is that when the viewer goes into the lobby, they will be underneath the sculptures. So it will be an abstraction. It will be a series of 8, like silver clouds ahead. But that when you go to the second floor, you will see the figures sort of like unfurling in their dance.
That's so special. And I was lucky to be in your studio to experience these works, like a part of it, only a small part of it. But I think what's so special when you experience it in person, and that's why like the pictures or even the videos don't do justice to this piece, is the materiality of it. It's so light. Like chains, they look so light and so vulnerable and so fragile, but they're also so strong at the same time. When they hang together, it's like there's a power to it. And I feel like you also play with light also for that, and you create this kind of, like almost mystical space. And I mean, one thing about, I think, being like light and heavy, strong, and also, like this kind of soft power is, and what you were also talking about, like this kind of woman empowerment and woman revolution and woman protests. I think what's special about this project, in my opinion, is that, when especially Western institutions, they talk about Southwest Asia, North Africa artists, that is like traditionally known as Middle East, right? Like we use Swana now as a new term. I feel like there is so much, like Western institutions, they focus on the pain and the fetish of the pain, especially when it relates to women. And I feel like your project is so special in the way that like you are talking about the empowerment and the joy of it. Because of course there is pain, but you are like showing it in terms of bodies that are dancing in the space. So I wonder, like I see it as a way that like you are breaking free from these like conventions and orientalization, that's so prevalent in the like white gaze kind of. Can you talk more about that and how you make that change and what this means for you and your practice, especially in this moment?
Yeah, it's interesting because the forms, even though they have these gowns, the original, like one of the original like ideas I had for the spinning of the forms was like of the Sufi spinning whirling dervishes, and that sort of, that somatic ritual of self inner transformation. And so I think for me, it is important always that the forms not be even necessarily gendered, that they exist in a neutral, some kind of state. And I hope that comes through, in the work, because I think that, that's important to me. Everybody, I think, has in the diaspora has very different and valid experiences of their experiences. And my experience vis-a-vis this issue in Iran was, for the most part, an experience of absence, right? I mean, I'm not there. And that's an experience itself. But I think that one thing that really profoundly impacted me was that my first time back to Iran, after we left as when I was a young child, I was 26. It was 2001. I was not prepared for what I would see in Tehran, and this is what I saw. I saw my peers, young men, many of whom were amputees in wheelchairs, physically and emotionally traumatized. It was so visually palpable. I will not forget seeing a young man in a wheelchair trying to navigate one of the streets in Tehran, which without a wheelchair is difficult anyway. And then I remember even seeing these gatherings of people, mostly young men, in the parks, and finding out from, I think, my father or someone that they were attending these meetings for addiction. Iran was like leading the world in heroin addiction at the time. And they couldn't contain the meeting inside because there were so many people. So they were in the parks. And so I guess the Western narrative, the dominant narrative in the United States of sort of like, you know, these like horrible, men in Iran oppressing, women who are victims. I came away seeing a city and a country in which these young men were it was horrific. It was horrific. And I think that the fates of men and women, people in Iran are tied, and I think that very much impacted and influenced the lens. That was the lens I saw things through when I came back and when I made work in an whatever unconscious way. So
thank you so much for sharing that, Afruz. I feel like it's, it's important to note that. And I feel like it's part of, how we change narratives at the museums, right? At the art museums. And this is how we change art history together. So I feel like that's why this project is so exciting. And I'm so looking forward to having the piece up at the museum, and hope our audience who joined us today could also join us when we have the piece up. But in the meantime, just to invite everyone, we have other projects going on at the Asian Art Museum. Just to note, there's a contemporary art collection that I recently curated that's on view throughout the summer. It's titled Interview, New Voices, New Stories. We have a Phoenix Kingdom show. So there's so much at Asian Art Museum. If anybody is tuning in from Bay Area or beyond, please make sure to come and join us. And I also want to make sure that we have time for the Q&A. We have been receiving amazing questions. I had one eye on there. So I would like to share some of them with you, Afruz, so that we can maybe respond. So the first question is, having experienced my house, my tomb in person, I was so moved by it. Your explanation on the two Taj Mahals was fascinating. Can you provide us with more detail about your technical process in producing these sculptures?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's very, very kind. I'm glad you saw it. The way that I made the piece was I welded it out of very thin strips of steel, and those sort of strips were then suspended by chain, and the black mesh that I adhered onto them was actually I discovered it one night. I was coming home from JFK, and I just, when there's like things are ubiquitous around you everywhere, but you don't notice them. And then, once you notice one thing, then you see it everywhere. So that happened as I saw there was at night this giant structure that was under construction, and it was lit up. It was night. It was lit with these industrial light bulbs, and it was wrapped with this mesh. And the mesh was there, I guess I learned later, is just to like protect the construction materials so they don't fall onto people. But I saw it and I was delighted. I thought it was so incredibly beautiful. I still don't know why they light up these structures at night. I haven't been able to get like an answer from any construction sites where I often ask. But after seeing how that illumination and how magical it was, I ordered like like 1,000 yards of the material, and so that's the mesh that you see for that makes the black Taj Mahal. And I think you can see that when I first made the piece was exhibited initially before it went to the museum side by side. Like you can see that there. Mm-hmm. I had wanted to like put them across from each other to sort of like be literal and true to the myth, but sometimes like literal things just don't work and you just have to let go. And it was really a joy to actually even further change the projects by having them be in a vertical formation, so that it was almost like the original Taj was giving birth to the sort of imagined Taj.
Amazing. And just reading our questions, there's a question about, can you explain more how you were inspired by the use of the chain and mesh medium? Have you seen it used by other artists, or what inspired you to work on such a medium? I am fascinated by this unique medium and your originality.
Thank you. I know I saw the mesh was used, of course, by the incredible artist Do Hosa. You know, he's created these total environments with, I don't know if it's the same type of material, but it's similar looking. And I think the appeal for both chain and the mesh for me is that they're non-solid, they're semi-transparent, they're ghostly. And I think that has always been like really important for me. And the way that they react with light creates something beyond the material itself. And so I think that was like really why, I mean, the other night I saw this mesh on a construction site and it was raining, and the way that the water was dripping on the mesh and the light was hitting it was just absolutely gorgeous. And so that's sometimes like how I'm led to a material. Is it's more often like I'm passing some kind of construction site and I'll see that there's something on that site that is interacting with water and light or light, and then it'll beckon to me, and I'll sometimes be able to use it and sometimes not. Sometimes the material is too beautiful to like use, you know. Like copper tubing, I think, is one thing I've always wanted to work with, but I think it's just too nice. So that's kind of like the impermeable, the non-opaque quality of those materials is really important to me.
I really love your obsession with construction sites. I have to say, Afruz. And you know, like research can be anything. Like I love that, you know, and I didn't tell, but like just to, you know, get it out there. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey. So like I also feel like I can be really obsessed with construction sites where we have like so many constructions in Turkey. So I'm just like enjoying this conversation so much. So okay, and like just talking about inspirations, we have this other amazing question that I really want to read to you, because we didn't get to, because of time limit, we didn't get to talk about like how you are inspired by poetry and language, because we had a question about that. You know, one of the conversations we were having was that like at the museum, like we are hoping that when we have your project up, we can have more Farsi language, for example, like appearance, and you are really inspired by poetry. So the question is, your poem as a part of Within the Metamorphosis was very powerful. Can you tell us a little more about the symbolism in that poem?
Thank you. And absolutely, I would love to. I had a clip of like a section of the poem being read about cranes. That was actually right. Yeah, so let me just back up a little bit. Like the appeal of poetry, I think, is its efficiency, its sparseness, it's like condensed language. And because it's so sparse, there's all these gaps that allow for non-literal reality, right? That allow for mystery. And so I think that's the appeal for me with poetry. It's like those gaps that allow you to stuff all of your own meaning into them that I find very important. I also think that just with language in general, we often look at language as like in this hierarchical way, like what's your dominant language? What's your mother language? But I think sometimes it's interesting to think about like there's some languages that aren't your dominant language, but you have more of an emotional relationship with, or you have more of an intellectual relationship with. And I guess I bring that up because I think poetry allows for that play, allows for that whimsy and that play. And in the poem for Within the Metamorphosis, I'll talk about one theme, which was the line and the circle. And that was like really the idea was that I had was that we live in a world of lines, and they're all artificial, whether they're headlines, whether they're front lines, whether they're border lines. They've all been created by us, and they can be uncreated by us. And what is a line if it no longer exists? Maybe it can curl itself up and become a circle. And maybe we want a society that functions more like a circle. And so that was sort of like the conceptual framework for this piece, was how do we coil the lines, the violence, how do we coil it back into something transformative? And then, yeah. So
I was gonna say that's so beautiful, like to think about, how can we make a line into a circle? I feel like that also comes from, like where we are from, kind of like from our region, like this kind of poetic thinking versus like Western analytical thinking. Because like when we think about it, like poetry is so important for our region, right? And it's like I feel like so inherent the way we think, and I love that it's coming through your practice. But on the opposite side of it, like we got this question, in our chat. They also say that, so there is this poetry, and then the question is about the mathematical and engineering scope that you have in your practice. So they're asking, as an artist, do you have a background in those areas? And how do you also manage those engineering requirements that are required to make the piece survive on the ceiling?
Yes. So I have like very poor mathematical geometric like skills. My father's an advanced mathematician. So I often in past projects have leaned on him for that kind of support, for a lot of geometric things that like I don't grasp. In terms of the engineering, it's really it's sort of like that's why, for example, I built a prototype to scale. I mean, oftentimes you hear people say they're building a prototype, and that means they're building something like this big. But for me, I try to at least like build one part of a project to scale, just to like really actually test the weight and the engineering of it. And when I built the first prototype for this upcoming project, it collapsed in and of itself because I used chain that was copper based. It wasn't aluminum. So yeah, so these things for me are sorted out just like through real time building. That's like how I trust it, I guess.
And I love that it's a learning process, right? So it's also test and error, and because this is also your life's work. And I feel like you are so interested in your materials. Like you are one of those artists that like you keep, going back to them. You really push the limits of it. I think that's what makes it so special. And there is also another question. Will there be a performance piece at the Asian Art Museum? And I wanted to bring it up because we were just talking about this recently. Do you want to respond to that?
I'd love for there to be one. Yeah, I would love that.
So now our audience is asking for it. We have to make it real. Is the point. And there was also another question, maybe I can respond to that, when the project is gonna be installed at Asian Art Museum. So we haven't confirmed the date yet, and I'll say that we will make sure that you receive the date as soon as we have it with Farhang Foundation, so that they can also share it with you all. It would be amazing to have you all there to celebrate together, Afruz's project and this really important, significant project for Asian Art Museum as well. So I just wanted to say, Afruz, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much. And thank you so much to the Farhang team for having us all. And thank you so much for our audience, you who listened to us and also who asked all these amazing questions. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't want this talk to end because I'm enjoying it so much, and I've learned so much. And Afruz, your work is just inspiring, and every time I delve into it or watch it, and I had the fortune to actually seeing the piece at the Asian Art Museum. It's just fascinating, and I can't stress how much more impactful it is even in person than what you see on the screen. So we are definitely very excited about the upcoming historic installation that Naz talked about. It will be the first time to have such a large scale piece by an Iranian artist at the Asian Art Museum. And we're very proud of it. And we look forward to collaborating with the Asian Art Museum on this piece as it continues its journey to becoming a reality. I want to thank everyone who joined us, especially Afruz and Naz, and taking the time to talk about this project. And I want to thank everyone else in the audience who has joined us from around the world to be here today. Please note that today's talk was recorded and will be made available on farhang.org, where you may watch this and all the many other episodes in the series. As always, please visit farhang.org for all the latest upcoming events, talks, performances, and programs. And we thank you for joining us from across the globe today, and we look forward to welcoming you again next time. So until our next conversation, thank you, Afruz. Thank you, Naz. I hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. We bid you all farewell.